In less than 2 weeks from recording this video, Palantir stock is going to have an absolutely pivotal day for investor sentiment around Palantir stock and probably stock price as well. No promises on the stock price, but I can definitely say for sure sentiment around Palantir stock is going to shift in a major way if a few events play out. And I'm going to talk about what those events are in this video. But before we get into all that, if you're new here, I'm Austin. I'm a co-owner of cloudbusinesstweet.com. I'm a stock market investor, and definitely most importantly for this video, I'm a Palantir shareholder. It's a pretty dang large position in my portfolio. It ranges somewhere between my number 5 and my number 2 biggest position in my entire portfolio. So needless to say, I'm certainly a Palantir bull. Real quick, 2 things. If you're not in the Patreon already, in our Patreon stock community, go ahead and check the pinned comment down there. We'd love to have you. And second, if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button. It means a lot to me. And as a thank you for doing that, here's a picture of all my animals: Penny, my dog, and my 2 cats, Millie and Luna. Millie's the gray one, Luna's the brown one. They all thank you for subscribing. Okay, let's get into this. So in about 2 weeks, Palantir is going to have a really pivotal day. And the day that I'm talking about is November 2nd. That's Thursday, before the market open around 8 a.m. That day is when Palantir is going to announce their third quarter results for 2023. And there's a few really key things I'm looking for. I'm going to talk about those things in this video. But quick aside, November 2nd is also the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. I just thought that was interesting. I don't know if they chose to do that on purpose or not, but random little tidbit I noticed. Kind of interesting now that Palantir has kind of cemented themselves as a war stock. But anyway, not the point of this video. Point of this video is that Palantir has been profitable on a GAAP basis. That's generally accepted accounting principles. It strips out one-time profits. It strips out one-time expenses. So they've already had 3 quarters in a row of those GAAP profits on the bottom line on the EPS numbers. And I don't see that changing in Q3 of 2023. I would say they're going to have another EPS positive quarter, somewhere around 1 cent, 2 cents, maybe 3 cents of EPS on a GAAP basis is my bet for what they're going to report. I'm also expecting their 3rd quarter in a row of income from operations being positive. Income from operations is absolutely massive. It's great to have that net income number positive, but if they're getting a bunch of interest income off these T-bills that they have, that's not overly sustainable because we're not always going to have the rates that we have on these T-bills that are paying insane interest right now. So it's much better to have income from operations, which indicates that the core business itself is profitable without any interest income whatsoever at all. So assuming Palantir does report GAAP net income and we've got those positive EPS numbers, what's probably coming down the road and what's going to change investor sentiment around Palantir in a pretty dang big way is that S&P 500 inclusion. It's important to know that a lot of people will never ever touch a stock that's unprofitable. And then there's another investor base that really doesn't invest in companies that are not in the S&P 500. Then remember, there's a class of people who are only index fund investors. There's a lot of people who are only index fund investors. So now they're going to have exposure to Palantir whether they like it or not, because the S&P 500 ETFs and funds out there are going to be required to add Palantir to their fund through a rebalancing if Palantir gets that S&P 500 inclusion. Of course, some other company would have to be dropped from the S&P 500 for Palantir to be included, but Palantir would have their most recent quarter being profitable, which is one of the requirements in order to be included in the S&P 500. And then the other requirement that they're going to get, assuming Q3 is profitable, is that the sum of their last 4 quarters is also profitable. They already have all the other criteria on the S&P 500 inclusion checklist. Those are really the last 2 that they have to get, and I think that's going to happen in Q3. Whether or not they get included in the S&P 500 by the end of 2023, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think the talks are going to become more and more, and typically, historically, we see a pretty big run up in the share price leading up to the S&P 500 inclusion announcement, and then once it's announced, another big run up, and then once the rebalancing happens, since there's a lot of buying pressure on Palantir, stock price also moves up. So if I had to say one way or another, is Palantir going to have a pretty dang good next 6 months to 12 months or a pretty dang bad 6 months to 12 months? I would say odds are they're going to have a very good next 6 to 12 months, mostly on the back of this S&P 500 inclusion and the continued profits rolling in. They're proving to the markets that they are really truly a profit generating company, and as long as we start to see the net income numbers growing much faster than the revenue, it's going to continue to be in a good spot for Palantir as it relates to investor sentiment, people considering putting their money into Palantir stock. Speaking about revenue growth, this has been definitely a sore spot for Palantir over the last few quarters. They had a quarter where they only grew 13%, and they had a quarter where they grew 17%. If the acceleration of revenue doesn't continue into Q3, I would expect some pain in the short term for Palantir stock. If we see like a 15% revenue growth number, which I don't think is going to happen, I think it's going to be somewhere around 19 to 21% revenue growth, maybe even more than that, and we're going to start to see this acceleration start to happen. As long as that happens, the growth story is definitely intact, along with those net income numbers growing and staying positive, of course. Palantir recently launched their AIP, the artificial intelligence platform. This company has always been very heavily involved in artificial intelligence, machine learning, data aggregation, data integration, etc. But now they have a product that is specifically for artificial intelligence. It's called the Artificial Intelligence Platform. What we want to hear for sure is that we're actually going to get some numbers coming through that are going to help Palantir in a massive way. We want contributable revenue, we want contributable profit eventually from the AIP. Whether or not that starts in Q3, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to start sooner rather than later. Maybe Q4 of 2023, maybe Q1 of 2024. But regardless, hearing commentary around the AIP is going to be huge, and I'm definitely looking forward to that on the Q3 earnings call. All of this and the continued geopolitical tension, believe it or not, is actually a good thing for Palantir. Since Palantir has software that can help on the battlefield, and they talk about it on a very regular basis, and they're in conversations with governments to provide this software to help a government that's maybe in a less advantaged position from a war standpoint. This is going to continue to help Palantir be in the spotlight, be in the limelight, potentially get more government contracts as well outside of the United States with US allies. So all of this geopolitical stuff is actually not a bad thing for Palantir stock. I'm not saying it's a good thing period whatsoever at all, but just looking at the very narrow lens of how does it relate to Palantir stock, overall it's going to be a good thing for Palantir sentiment as we have these little geopolitical issues. Not that I wish these geopolitical issues continue, but you get the point, okay? I'm definitely looking forward to the S&P 500 Inclusion talks to start to ramp up with Palantir as they report their fourth quarter in a row of GAAP profits, third quarter in a row of GAAP profits from operations. That revenue growth start to accelerate even more going into Q3 and Q4 of 2023. Let me know what you're doing out there with Palantir shares. Do you hold Palantir shares right now? Are you staying away from Palantir? Are you selling, shorting, etc.? Are you doing call option plays, put option plays? I definitely want to hear about it in the comments. Let me know down below. Do you think Palantir is going to be included in the S&P 500 anytime soon? Let me know in the comments. That's one of my favorite parts of posting here on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. Have an amazing day.